stage is yours.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. For the sake of time, we skip what NATO is, where I work. If you're curious about that, we can talk about that later. To not confuse, the headquarters, SHAPE is the highest military headquarters located in Mons, Belgium. We are different than our political masters who sit at NATO HQ in Brussels. My job, you see there, we do everything CIS security related, from inspection policy, incidents, etc. Now, I have to mention that this topic I selected for you, and it is not the voice or the official view of NATO on the subject selected. Now, we don't go into too much detail on history and politics and political science. This is the agenda I had in mind for today. We go a little bit quicker because we started late and to give other speakers the time to speak and to get your attention, so that's what you're looking at. Now, the first one, what is a democracy? I'm not a master in political science, but you see on the slide a couple interesting critical statements which we will use later when it comes to the effects of a hacker and to what technology can influence when you look at this. You have the power of a citizen that directly or through election of representatives engages with the government and with the state itself. You see in the second one the rule of majority. Unfortunately, every vote should count, every body should matter, but of course not everybody can have a say in a government and in a state, or this would turn into chaos. A lot of what's happening during an election, during a 4 or 5 year rulership period, needs to run on procedures, on certain rules and regulations, and those we have to protect. We have to be aware of them. We need to know what's happening, not only as we saw earlier in a company or when it comes to cybercrime, we also need to know what our governments do in the meantime. And you saw in the past, and we will see that there are a couple of cases where this was already played with, messed with, and to an interesting effect. The problem of hacking and hacking a democracy, is that new? I would dare to say no. We have seen that before. We all had been aware of cases where companies got hacked. Intellectual property was stolen, and some companies, unfortunately, actually went down because if on a Friday you lose your intellectual property, you come to a company that on Monday basically can close its business because it's out of the market. Now, this is strictly speaking already messing with a government. It's messing with a state, because if you do that, or if you would imagine you do that often enough, it will destabilize a country. It will actually cause some problems. In Germany, for example, where I'm from, if a company has a problem with a sophisticated hacking attack, they can appeal to the government, to the Office of the Protection of the Constitution, and seek help. That tells you something, that this office has understood there is a problem, we need to maybe help, we need to engage, and we need to protect what makes up, as some people might know, German engineering, German intellectual property, and the same is of course true for your nations in your countries. And hopefully you have a system like this in place. Now we have other examples after we speak about this in general. You had big examples in the headlines, Titan Rain, for example. That was supposedly China against the US in a hacking campaign that was with economic goals, focusing on military trade secrets. Then interestingly enough, when we look at the Baltics, where we are now, you of course had the famous story where, because the move of a soldier and of a statue caused a lot of anonymity between Russia and Estonia. That was basically an attack on the e-presence of Estonia, and with that an attack on the government and its people. You had Russia against Georgia. This is not focused now against Russia, don't get me wrong, but these are interesting examples where you suddenly have two states and they clash because of a simple problem, a misunderstanding, or because of a bigger agenda that one of the two participants plays and executes part of it in cyberspace. Now, what did we learn in those early days? Companies suddenly became aware of, and you saw that in the video, there is a problem with cyberspace. companies need to get ready for it. Now, smaller to medium-sized companies, are they ready? I would dare to say no. Are they ready now? Maybe not. A lot is now outsourced, a lot is now trusted into cloud, a lot is trusted into third-party vendor support. A lot of companies are still lost in space. A lot of countries are still struggling to deal with the whole cyber problem. What does cyberspace mean? We come to this later in the presentation for NATO, for example, cyberspace as an operational domain. Some of the countries in the audience, hopefully you have identified that. Some have accepted it. The US, the UK, now Spain, Germany, France, and others. So that has a huge impact. And critical is that you analyze how you operate when you are running your state, your government, or even your business. Because the more dependent you are on e-services, the more easy it is to attack and to disrupt those services. That's important later when we come to the actual meat of hacking a democracy. We also saw something surprising, and it was against Georgia in the attack, that a lot of countries now rely on the internet and consider this a given. Now, interestingly enough, for bigger countries, that's most likely the case. Smaller countries, or if you're just engaging the internet broadly, this might not be necessarily the case, because you might remember that Georgia was actually cut off the internet by manipulation of internet routing and by disabling a couple services. Now we make a transfer again. Suddenly, you have a state under attack. The same was true for Estonia. Suddenly, you have a couple hackers who are smart enough and figure that out. And for example, a Turkish router was blocking the traffic to Georgia. German hackers figured that out and tried to, from Germany, to establish a routing into internet traffic towards Georgia. Now suddenly one country is under attack. The same happened, by the way, in the Estonian attack. And now a second, not nation, but its people engages this and might make the nation a target. So you see again, hacking democracies. Estonia services had been backed up to the United States and tried to operate from there. What do you think if you're under attack, where the attack will go, where the traffic is coming from and where the content is located that you are after? That means you as a government need to have this on the radar and you need to prepare to act on it, even if just some of your individuals engage this topic. And unfortunately, we all remember September 11 in the States, the attack on the Twin Towers. Not only did thousands of people die, but also a lot of internet services died because below those Twin Towers had been a major handover point of internet traffic to the United States. That's where the issue comes from, that some of our potential adversaries are interested, highly interested in the undersea cables that transmit a lot of traffic over the ocean or through the Mediterranean. Because if you could imagine cutting them off or controlling the traffic, gives you an interesting opportunity and an interesting advantage. Now, what happened since then? And like I said, for the sake of time, we don't go into all those incidents, but you see, not much happened. We had a lot of incidents, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We had a lot of high-profile events, as you see. And why does this happen? Because, again, people want to make money, want to get intellectual property, want to get a strategic advantage when we look into the military space. And we are all clear on one thing: it's easier to steal than to do research or development on your own, unfortunately. That's why this will also not go away. If we believe for an angel coming down and fixing this, that's not going to happen. Now, hacking democracies. In the last couple of years, we didn't call it that way. That was a fairly new development. But we have seen that this suddenly is not only a technical issue anymore. And now we come to the heart of the story. Because now it suddenly involves also processes and people, and maybe systems, as I said before, supporting those processes. If anybody in the audience has attended this year DEF CON in the States, in Las Vegas, or if you followed the news, you will realize that something very interesting happened. The hacker community actually was told, here are some voting machines, see what you can do with that. This is, of course, an isolated view on voting machines only. I said we need to elevate ourselves and look at processes and other things as well. But the voting machine hack, and by the way, all the machines given to the hackers had been owned by the hackers a couple hours later. Some of them lasted a few days. But this created media attention because suddenly the attack on a democracy, on an election, became visible to a broader community. And it raised in Las Vegas the interesting topic and the interesting discussion that national critical infrastructure is not only your power, your water, your sewage, food, fuel, and other things, maybe transportation when some people think a little bit further. This is also potentially the process on how you keep your democracy going, how the people interact with the government, how the government interacts with the people, and how it generates the opinion of the people and gauges their interest or their disinterest. You have a problem if there's a weak element in the chain. That weak element, as always, will be exploited. If somebody manages to break the trust between the government and its people, you have a huge problem because that trust is difficult or impossible to restore. And that we need to keep in mind because that's a hook where other entities can hook in and attack the system. This is not new either. A lot of hacking from wherever you are in the world, and it was mentioned in the video and it was mentioned by the moderator. Cyberspace created an interesting phenomena that time and space doesn't really matter because now you have access to systems and information from anywhere in the world at nearly any time. And the hacking of a democracy, again, it is cheap, it's low cost, but it can have a huge effect or it can generate a huge damage. How? We come to that in a minute. Fairly easy again, unfortunately. Another problem, and I raise a lot of questions, not necessarily do I have an answer, because this is more looking into the community, looking into the people, looking into the states, the governments, and the representatives, that they become aware of that and maybe do something about it. Because not only is hacking a voting machine of interest, we all know how elections work. Every vote should matter. Every vote should be counted. Every person and his opinion should matter, at least in general. Now, when you look at mathematical formulas for elections, what error margin is acceptable when you have at one point that statement, every vote matters, and then is a 1%, a 3% error margin during an election acceptable? If you think of 100 million voters, 3% is quite a lot. That is an interesting problem. And when you look at what happened during DEF CON, and the same was mentioned, by the way, at CyCon. CyCon is the Conference of Cyber Conflict in Estonia, usually in May every year. They looked at the same thing, funny enough, at the same year, that was this year, where the Estonian government even explained how they protect the information of the people, how they protect the processes that make up the Estonian government, and how they care for the trust of the people, because they actually said in front of the audience, smaller than this one, but they had been proud to have the trust of the people, and they admitted they never want to lose it because they expect it impossible to be restored. Now, this is, of course, raised the question from the US side. Looking at the last big hacks that we have experienced and that we have seen in the news, it's also an interesting question. You know, taxpayers' money funds a lot of activities. How far should a taxpayer's money be used to protect certain services? And here it was the DNC hack that we took as an example, because a lot of voter information is being held by third-party organizations supporting an election, supporting a voting system, supporting a government. And do they need that type of data? Can we even protect all those informations and all those systems? Equifax raised the same question on the financial market. Suddenly people became aware, holy crap, where is all that information? Who holds all my critical information? It's the same here. How far do we need to go? How deep down do we need to extend protection, government awareness, or even the people's awareness where my data is located? Because, you know, hacking a democracy, hacking a company, hacking a process I need to have information. I need to know a lot about you, that I can enter the circle of trust and then hone into the target. And then I will exploit the target and try to break the system, influence you, manipulate you, blackmail you, whatever comes to mind. The more data is available, the better I can target the individual. When you think of the US and all the recent unfortunate hacks and spillages, the public basically now knows, and the public, I mean the world, if you find those databases, sexual preferences of people, are they a gun owner, their religious preferences, their family situation, their financial situation. That means a complete profiling is possible. And if you have a military background, you know what the intelligence community can do with a good profile of an individual. It tells you a lot, it allows predictions, it allows exploits. So the voting system, the voter itself, can be exploited the more we spill. In some countries it's already too late because enough has been spilled to allow this, but in other countries we can still do our homework. And if I can exploit the voter, the people, I have information operation, as some of our countries call it, or our adversaries. That's what you do when you want to influence a neighboring country or a country across the world. Whatever comes out of it, usually right now, of course, election outcomes. We have another interesting topic, guest influence. When you think about an election, there is a year, 2 years time of preparation that goes with it. How much foreign influence or even industry influence, financial influence do you want in that system and do you want to allow in that system? Money can buy a lot of interest, money can buy voters, money can buy news, information operations, etc. If you say, I don't want this, that's in the middle of the slide. Can we even afford to stop that? Is it possible to stop this type of influence? A bigger question, should it be stopped? Because do I want that type of influence or can we handle it? Should the democratic process be strong enough to handle this in itself? Is a government prepared to counter messages from the outside or that suddenly erupt based on the latest hacks, the latest insider information, the latest fake news, if you want to call it that way? And we have one example, which was former President Obama speaking on the matter of the Brexit. Should the Brexit be a British problem alone, or at least an EU country problem, or should the world actually elaborate on this and give an opinion of what they believe is best? The same happened if you look back into the Trump campaign. A lot of people suddenly had a voice, had an opinion, and had to voice that very loudly. Do we need that? Do we want that? Should we allow it? In the meantime, is there a way to stop it? A very good question. We come to social media and the effects in a minute, because that's one of the biggest problems at the moment, the empowered entity, and that could be you, me, all of us here in the room. What's the power at the moment of social media? And it brings back the question, do we need to control social media? And I know what I'm saying here because that comes in the slide as well. Controlling social media, is that some kind of censorship? Do I suddenly shut you up when I actually should allow you to voice your opinion? Again, back to the question, should a democracy be strong enough to allow an empowered individual to voice his opinion? Now, with modern technology, an empowered individual, we also need to be aware of that, could mean a lot. It could be one voice, but you could have a circle of friends. You could control the botnet that suddenly spams a lot of news if you have some serious political interest or disagreement with your government. And that's the problem. What's the escalation factor in that? In the past, famous entities to influence an election had been the press, of course. The press was considered independent. They usually brought you the latest news, the latest scandals, and that's what influenced people. Now, it's maybe social media, or at least on par with the press. And again, the free speech of an individual or of a group could be the information operation of an adversary group or even of a state. And we need to be aware of that as well. How do I know, or do I even know, where that opinion, that message, that piece of news comes from? More on the empowered entity. Governments are now concerned about the power of social media, and we had that recently in a couple of the elections in the US, in Germany, in France, in other countries. When the political parties and our potential future leaders embrace social media, this is considered cool, this is modern, that's what they should do, that's what a lot of people expect. Now, when other people do that, we are suddenly afraid of fake news, foreign countries manipulating us. So where's the balance? Where's the checks and balance on this? What can I do to be aware of this and maybe prevent that anything bad will happen? The next thing is the states as a big example. Billions of dollars flow into election campaigns. And now comes the power of social media, where with low to minimum effort, you can create a huge effect. You have a huge replication of effects via social media. Should that be allowed? Should there be adjustments be made? And that, of course, allows then attack vectors, because, like I said, if you have information spilled, if you have targeting of people, of individuals, of groups, that allows vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And, of course, this works for us. If somebody spills something which the voter should know before he makes his vote, this also works against us if it's fake news and suddenly spilled and nobody has a time or a chance to actually correct it before the votes are being cast, if you are aware of that. Now, we could be naive and say, once the problem is understood, this will mean good things for us, because we could hope that the politicians become aware of this, that they are actually afraid of their dirty laundry being brought to light, and that the information spilled will be right and good, and it will educate us and will create a better environment. The joke is, should we rely on foreign governments and hackers to actually try and find out the bad things about the politicians? That's not the way how we should go into the future or into the 21st century. There is another problem, because as you see and as we can imagine, once that problem is understood, a lot of governments will suddenly take action and will try to block a lot of this. They will try to control the media, they will try to influence the people, the internet, and make things more difficult. Transparency will become harder, and you already see that in cyberspace when you look at the discussion on the pros and cons of a hacker tool. It's a double-edged sword. Here it's the same thing. Revealing the truth is good, but if you are afraid of that, you will try to shut that channel down and prevent spillage of that type of information. And that's then not the political system we want to see and we want to move with into the future. The outlook. Now, the outlook is not really that good, because, like I said, there are a lot of questions. They are huge questions. Who will fix that? This is not a hacker issue. This is not a voting machine issue. This will not be fixed in Las Vegas or in Hamburg at the end of the year in a big hacker congress or in the room here. This is much, much more interesting and much, much more complex. It is one of many issues we have to fix when you look at the video and look at the events of the last couple of years and what's coming. In the context of the forum and the discussion, the GDPR, again, a huge issue known for years, and as the moderator said, a lot of companies sit on the problem and wait for somebody to tell them what to do. That's now slowly too late. Now, a little bit back to NATO, where I come from. We have identified a lot of the issues. We have nominated last year cyberspace as an operational domain. We have the Cyber Pledge, which is the agreement of 29 nations to help each other and to bring them to a stable level of cybersecurity. This is already a very good and very interesting move. This might actually be beneficial. The next question is, should a defense alliance have that on their radar? At the moment, we don't. That's an honest, open statement and shouldn't be a secret. But is that maybe potentially something that the diplomats in Brussels will look at? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe there is at least the request for help possible to partners, to neighbors, if you are under attack or if you believe you are being manipulated. There are a few points into the right direction and a few indicators that some of the nations, some of the players in the game have understood this and have woken up. But like I said, the big questions remain, and they are, apart from cybercrime and data protection, for us now to look into and to potentially resolve in the near future. A famous person realized fairly recent when you look at the global history, not too recent when you look into the history of the last century, that we all, one person at a time, can make a difference, and that we should all try. So if somebody says, this is not my problem, or this is bigger than me, maybe yes, but maybe not. Maybe you ask the right questions to your government, to your representative, to somebody who will help you, or to industry. What can you do with this? What do you do to protect me as an individual, as a member of democracy of my country? Ladies and gentlemen, with that we conclude. I don't know if we have time for a question or two, but interestingly enough, we make a reference again back to the video where we are all part of Anonymous and we are Legion. So, open for questions.
Okay, do we have any questions right now in the audience? Please raise your hand. Okay, now ladies and gentlemen in the back, the ones that are standing, there are plenty of seats in the first 8 to 10 rows, particularly in the middle. Please come up here, don't stand there. There's plenty of seats still in the hall. Please come here. Right, Holger, I'm terribly sorry, but we are really out of time. Anyway, a quick one. Now, usually governments are quite secretive about if they are being hacked, not being hacked, withholding that information. Now, how does it come together with e-government and with transparency, etc.? Now, isn't it the best strategy, like just cry out loud, we're being hacked, help, da-da-da, these are the bad guys, and maybe something happens?
That might help, but I think it's like children. If you cry enough and often enough, and at some point there's a saturation level and nobody will listen anymore. That goes back to the trust we said earlier. Yeah. You need to cry, there needs to be a reason to cry, and you better have proof that you are under attack. And then I think something will happen, something will be done.
Yeah, with the proofs, it's usually, is the problem. Is the problem with the clear proof. And again, sometimes the proof is just not enough. Sometimes you just make a press conference, say, we don't care if we have any comments. We don't care if we right or wrong. We're just being hacked. It's done by these guys, period. So we just want the world to know you. Okay, I'd like to thank you for attending here and holding this fantastic keynote today. A warm applause to Holger Spohn. Thank you.